Lauren Bishop ran a hand over the dusty, sealed envelope, the brittle paper crinkling under her touch. The words stamped in faded black ink, mineral rights, Parcel 7B, seemed to hum with a forgotten energy. She thought she had just bought a rundown cabin with $1 million view, a place to escape the sirens and find peace. She had no idea that locked away in a rusty file drawer, a secret worth over $9 million was waiting for her. But as she stared at the official-looking seals, a chilling question surfaced. Would this dusty paperwork be her salvation, or would it drag her into a fight she couldn't possibly win? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The narrative of Lauren Bishop's life had always been written in service to others, a story told in the urgent pulse of a failing heartbeat or the strained quiet of a rescue litter. Her reflection showed a woman whose competence was her most defining feature, more prominent than any conventional glamour. Laugh lines, earned from moments of gallows humor in the face of chaos, fanned out from the corners of her eyes. But those eyes held a focused, steady gaze that had assessed everything from catastrophic bleeds in a dusty Kandahar province to the treacherous pitch of a trail in the high Rockies. She had worn the uniform of the National Guard, her hands, skilled and sure, working as a medic in environments where stress was the baseline state of existence. After her service, she traded the arid landscapes of deployment for the granite peaks of her home state, becoming a backcountry EMT, a ghost of efficiency who appeared on the worst days of people's lives to perform rescues in the very mountains she now hoped to call home. Her world had shrunk in the best way to a universe of two. Her son, Leo, a bright, inquisitive 10-year-old with his father's dark hair and her own observant eyes, was the anchor that grounded her. Their bond was forged in the quiet moments that punctuated their bustling life, a language of shared glances and easy understanding. "Pancakes are a go, mission control," she announced, flipping a perfectly golden brown disc onto a plate. Their small, rented apartment kitchen was a testament to organized clutter, every inch of counter space utilized. Leo, perched on a stool with a book of constellations open before him, looked up and grinned. "Roger that, Commander. Is the syrup payload ready for deployment?" "Affirmative. And it's the good stuff, not that high-fructose corn syrup imposter," she said, placing the plate in front of him. Their interactions were a warm, comforting routine, a small pocket of peace in a world that always felt like it was rushing past their window. But Lauren was tired. She wasn't running from her past, from the ghosts of the lives she had and hadn't saved, but she was seeking to repurpose her skills in a quieter, more self-sufficient way. The constant thrum of adrenaline, once a familiar companion, had become a draining hum in the background of her life. She yearned for a different kind of purpose, one measured in seasons and sunsets, not sirens and sprints. She wanted to build a permanent, stable home for Leo, a place where his world could expand beyond the confines of their two-bedroom apartment and the concrete of the city. Her savings were modest, a carefully guarded sum that was a testament to a life of service, not profit. It was a gamble, every penny of it, but the dream of a quiet life on the mountain was a powerful lure, a siren song of her own. The GSA auction was held in a sterile, impersonal government building downtown, a place that smelled of weak, percolated coffee, damp wool coats, and the clashing sense of ambition and quiet desperation. Lauren sat on a hard plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, feeling distinctly out of place. She watched the other bidders, a cross-section of humanity drawn by the promise of a bargain. There was a slick developer in a tailored suit, his polished shoes tapping an impatient rhythm on the linoleum floor. He exuded an aura of predatory confidence, scanning the room as if it were his personal hunting ground. A young hipster couple, radiating romantic notions and smelling faintly of patchouli, whispered excitedly to each other, their eyes wide with dreams of a rustic getaway. And then there were the locals, a few grizzled men with weathered faces and calloused hands, their expressions unreadable as they sized up the competition with the quiet wisdom of those who knew the land intimately. Lauren felt like an imposter among them, a city dweller with a mountain dream. The ranger station, officially designated Lot 47C, appeared on a large screen at the front of the room. The slideshow of unflattering photos did it no favors. Peeling green paint, a porch that sagged like a tired sigh, and a roof patched with a chaotic mosaic of mismatched tarps. The auctioneer, a man with a droning, monotonous voice, read the description in a dry tone that focused on lot numbers, acreage, and legal disclaimers. Sold as is, where is, he repeated, the words a stark warning against sentimentality. Lauren's posture was tense, but her resolve was firm. She had spent weeks poring over topographical maps, her finger tracing the property lines, noting its most valuable asset. It bordered a vast, protected national forest. It was an island of private land in a sea of untouched wilderness. That was its true worth. The developer, whose name was apparently Mr. Thorne, made a few aggressive early bids, his voice loud and dismissive, a clear tactic to scare off the less serious competition. Imagine the Airbnb potential, the hipster woman whispered to her partner, her voice carrying in the quiet room. We could call it the A-frame of mind. Lauren clutched her bidder number, 113, her knuckles turning white. She had a strict limit, a number she and Leo had calculated down to the last dollar, factoring in the cost of immediate essential repairs. It was the entirety of her life savings. The bidding climbed a verbal ladder to her future. The hipster couple dropped out with a disappointed sigh, their romantic dream colliding with financial reality. Soon it was just her and Thorne. The developer turned in his seat to look at her, a smirk playing on his lips. He saw a woman in a practical flannel shirt and worn jeans. No real competition. He raised the bid by $5,000, a casual flick of his wrist. The price hit her absolute maximum, $120,000. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and hope. She hesitated, the auctioneer's call of going once, echoing in the cavernous room. Her hand instinctively went to her wallet, where she kept a small, slightly creased photo of Leo, his gap-toothed grin a beacon of everything that mattered. She took a deep breath, raised her bidder number, and in a clear, steady voice that belied the tremor in her soul, she placed her final, decisive bid. Thorne scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. He shook his head, a gesture of contemptuous dismissal, and turned back to face the front, letting her have it. Going once, going twice, the auctioneer droned, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. Sold. To bidder 113 for $120,000. The gavel fell with a sharp, definitive crack that seemed to sever her past from her future. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror, immediately followed by a surge of wild exhilaration, washed over her. She did it. She owned a piece of the mountain. But as the other bidders began to shuffle out, the crushing reality of her gamble set in. She had just poured every cent she had into a property she had only ever seen in a series of sad, pixelated photographs. The drive up the mountain was a journey into the heart of her dream. The winding dirt road, rutted and poorly maintained, was a challenge for her old pickup truck. But with every upward mile, the city fell away, replaced by the majestic sweep of the landscape. The air grew crisp and clean, scented with pine and damp earth. Towering ponderosas stood like silent sentinels, their branches framing a sky of impossible blue. This was it. This was the view, the peace, the very reason for her gamble. Then they rounded a final, sharp bend, and the dream collided with reality. The ranger station was worse than the photos. It slumped against the mountainside as if exhausted, the weight of years of neglect pressing down on its very frame. The smell of damp wood, mildew, and something vaguely animalistic hit them first. Broken windows were boarded up with mismatched pieces of plywood, and the wind whistled a mournful tune through the countless cracks in the walls. Leo, who had been bouncing with excitement in the passenger seat, grew quiet. "It needs a lot of work, huh, Mom?" he asked, his voice small. Lauren forced a confident smile, her own shock carefully masked. "That's okay, buddy," she said, her voice bright and full of a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "It's got good bones. And look at that view. We can fix the rest." She swept her arm towards the panorama unfolding before them, a breathtaking vista of rolling, blue-green ridges that stretched to the horizon. The first few days were a montage of relentless, back-breaking labor. Lauren's practical, no-nonsense character took over. She was in her element, triaging the cabin's problems like she would a patient. They started by clearing years of accumulated debris from around the structure, then moved inside, tearing out moldy drywall and patching the most immediate holes in the roof to keep the autumn rains at bay. They worked together, a small, determined team against the wilderness and decay, making one corner of the sprawling cabin habitable with a couple of cots, a camp stove, and a single working lantern. It was during the clearing of a back room, a space that had clearly served as the main office, that she encountered it. A large, heavy, metal file cabinet, a relic from the 1970s, stood against the far wall, its olive-green paint flaking away to reveal patches of rust. It was locked and the key was long gone. After a few minutes of wrestling with it, she fetched a crowbar from her truck. With a grunt of effort, she wedged the tip into the gap of the top drawer and pried. The metal shrieked in protest, a long, groaning complaint, before the drawer finally surrendered and slid open. The smell of stale paper and decay billowed out. The contents were a mess of moldy, water-damaged reports, desiccated rodent nests, and the skeletal remains of unfortunate insects. It was junk. Disappointed, she began to scoop the debris into a trash bag, but her fingers brushed against something solid and smooth beneath the detritus. It was a series of thick, manila envelopes, their edges surprisingly crisp, bundled together with a brittle rubber band that snapped the moment she touched it. They had been protected from the worst of the moisture by their position in the drawer. Each was sealed with a disc of hardened, burgundy-colored wax, stamped with an official-looking Forestry Service insignia. She carefully lifted them out, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thud. It was the markings, typed in a clean, blocky font, that caught her eye and held it. Timber Access, Coyote Ridge, Escrow Holding, Final Transfer. And the last one, the one that felt heavier than the rest, Mineral Rights Deeds, Parcel 7B Cluster. They felt important, dense with the weight of forgotten business. Her medic's mind, methodical and analytical, kicked in, pushing aside the sudden, dizzying flare of hope. This wasn't a lottery ticket, she told herself. It was evidence. It was a puzzle. She felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same focused calm that settled over her in the moments before a crisis turned one way or the other. It was a potent cocktail of intense curiosity, profound hope, and a deep-seated caution honed by years of experience. This could be nothing, she knew, just the bureaucratic detritus of a long-defunct government office, paperwork rendered meaningless by the passage of time. But it could also be everything. As she stood there in the dusty, sun-streaked room, the silent forest bearing witness, Lauren Bishop made a decision. Her next step wouldn't be celebration, not yet. It would be investigation. The mountain air, crisp and charged with the scent of pine, was a stark contrast to the stale, recycled atmosphere of the county courthouse. Lauren drove down the winding road, leaving the quiet solitude of her new, dilapidated kingdom behind. The building itself was a monument to drab functionality, a place of fluorescent lights that hummed with a weary energy, casting a pale, flat glow on worn linoleum floors. The air inside was thick with the hushed, dusty smell of old paper and the faint, metallic tang of ink. Dressed in clean jeans and a simple button-down shirt, Lauren felt like a visitor from another world, her hiking boots seeming too loud on the polished floors. She approached the records counter, a long formica barrier behind which a woman presided over a fortress of stacked files and overflowing in trays. The woman's nameplate read Carol. She was in her late 50s, with a perpetually tired expression etched onto her face and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up from a form she was stamping, her eyes conveying a profound sense of institutional weariness. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. "I hope so," Lauren began, her voice calm and even. "I'd like to look up some old property records. Specifically, land transfers from the U.S. Forestry Service from the late 1970s and early 80s. Carol let out a long, slow sigh, the sound of 1,000 similar, fruitless requests. Honey, those records are ancient. Half of them are on microfiche, probably misfiled when the regional office shut down. The other half are in plat books so big they need 2 people to lift them. You need a parcel number, a transfer date, something specific. I can't just go looking for some old records. Lauren had anticipated this. She had spent the previous evening carefully photographing the details on the envelopes with her phone, organizing the numbers in a small notebook. She hadn't broken the wax seals. That felt like a line she wasn't ready to cross. But all the necessary identifiers were typed clearly on the outside. She slid the notebook across the counter, open to a neatly written page. I have these, she said. Parcel numbers, deed references, and the names of the associated tracts. Carol's gaze flickered down to the notebook. Her eyebrows, which had been knitted in a frown of dismissal, rose a fraction of an inch. She was clearly, and begrudgingly, impressed by Lauren's preparation. This wasn't some wide-eyed treasure hunter with a vague story. This was organized. Well, Carol said, her tone shifting from outright dismissal to grudging cooperation. That's a start. She pushed herself away from the desk and led Lauren to a corner of the vast room where a row of beige, archaic-looking machines sat on a long table. This is the microfiche reader. The Forestry Service records are in these cabinets. Good luck. The search was a descent into a maddening analog hell. The film was scratched, the focus knob on the reader was loose, and the pages of scanned documents swam in and out of clarity, a blurry green and black soup of bureaucratic jargon. Lauren's eyes burned from the strain of staring at the glowing screen. She spent hours hunched over the machine, her back aching, cross-referencing the numbers from her notebook with the faded, ghostly images on the film. She moved from the reader to the massive, leather-bound plat books, their pages brittle and crumbling at the edges. The maps were a labyrinth of lines and numbers, a language she only partially understood. A sense of being an outsider settled over her, a feeling of being a small, insignificant person trying to push against the immense, indifferent weight of the past. Frustration gnawed at her, but she pushed it down. She had faced worse. She had held lives in her hands while helicopters battled updrafts on a cliff face. She could handle dusty paper. She was so engrossed in tracing a faint property line on a map that she didn't notice the old man until he spoke. His voice a low, gravelly rumble. You're looking for the old Forestry Service relinquishment parcels, aren't you? Lauren started, looking up from the heavy book. An elderly man stood beside her, leaning on a simple wooden cane. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were a startlingly bright blue, crinkled at the corners by decades of smiling or squinting at the sun. He wore a worn tweed jacket and carried an air of quiet authority. Yes, I think so, Lauren said, momentarily flustered. How did you know? He tapped a bony finger on her notebook, near the parcel number for the 7B cluster. Arthur Vance. He introduced himself, offering a hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. I was the county surveyor here for 40 years. I'd know those numbers anywhere. Caused a big headache back in the day. The Forestry Service was consolidating its holdings, planned to sell off a bunch of non-essential parcels. They drew up the surveys, prepared the deeds, the whole 9 yards. Then poof. The regional office in charge of the final sale got shut down in the budget cuts of '82. Everything just stopped. The paperwork went into a black hole. Lauren stared at him, a new, more potent wave of hope rising within her. This man wasn't just an observer. He was a part of the history she was trying to uncover. I found the deeds, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In an old file cabinet at the ranger station I just bought. Arthur's bright blue eyes widened. You don't say. Sealed. Sealed, she confirmed. A slow grin spread across his face. Well, I'll be. Follow me. He turned and led her away from the public records area, through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, and down a dimly lit hallway. He stopped at an unmarked wooden door and pulled a ring of old-fashioned keys from his pocket. selecting a long, iron one. The lock turned with a satisfying clunk. "Carol gets annoyed when I come back here," he said with a conspiratorial wink. "But she knows I'm the only one who still knows where anything is." He pushed the door open, revealing a room that seemed untouched by time. It was a cartographer's dream, a library of maps. Large, flat file drawers lined one wall, and rolled-up survey maps filled cubbies that stretched to the ceiling. The air smelled of old paper, ink, and dust. It was the scent of history itself. Arthur walked over to one of the large, flat file cabinets and pulled open a wide, shallow drawer. They didn't have fancy computers back then. Everything was done by hand on one master map. This was the heart of the county. He carefully lifted out a huge sheet of heavy linen paper, its edges yellowed with age, and spread it across a large wooden table. It was a master survey map from the 1960s, a beautiful, intricate web of hand-drawn lines, elegant calligraphy, and faded watercolor washes indicating different types of land. "There," he said, his finger tracing a path Lauren recognized from her own topographical studies. He tapped a section of the map. "There's your ranger station. And here," his finger moved slightly, tapping a cluster of parcels outlined in a faint red ink, "is the 7B cluster." Lauren leaned in, her eyes fixed on the map. It was all there. The parcels from her deeds were laid out, connected, a missing piece of a larger puzzle. And in the center of the cluster, encompassing a significant portion of the land, was a label written in the same elegant script. It read, "Granite Peak Quarry, defunct." "The quarry shut down in the 80s, Arthur explained, his voice low. "Some kind of dispute over the access road which cuts right through that parcel cluster. Without clear access, they couldn't move the stone. But the Forestry Service had already prepared the deeds to sell it all off, access rights included. My guess is your envelopes contain the very deeds that were supposed to be filed and recorded before the office was shuttered. They were signed, sealed, and then forgotten. Legally, they might as well not exist. But if you have them, if the chain of title is unbroken—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the dusty air. "You've got more than just a leaky roof on your hands, young lady. You've got a genuine, bona fide legal conundrum." Back at the cabin, the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley, painting the ridges in hues of orange and deep purple. Leo was asleep on his cot, his book of constellations resting on his chest. The silence of the mountain felt different now, charged with a new and heavy significance. Lauren sat at the small table they had set up, her laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed "Granite Peak Quarry" into the search bar. The first few results were historical articles, confirming everything Arthur Vance had told her. The quarry, once a major local employer, had closed in 1983 due to protracted legal battles over access rights. The company that owned it went bankrupt, and the quarry itself, along with its valuable granite deposits, became a ghost, a piece of local lore. Then she found it. It was a more recent article published just 6 months ago in a regional business journal. The headline was unassuming: "Apex Industrial Eyes Regional Expansion with Quarry Acquisition." Her heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. She clicked the link. The article detailed the plans of a major national construction firm, Apex Industrial, to reopen several defunct quarries to meet the demands of a series of massive federal infrastructure projects. Granite Peak Quarry was at the top of their list, prized for its unique, high-quality stone. The article mentioned the historical access issues and stated that the company was actively working to resolve them. Driven by a frantic energy, she refined her search, adding Apex Industrial and the parcel numbers. The link that appeared was not to a news story, but to a public notice, a dry, legal document posted on the county's official website. It was a standing offer. Her eyes scanned the dense text, her mind struggling to process the words. Apex Industrial hereby issues a public offer for the acquisition of Granite Peak Quarry and its associated access rights, specifically pertaining to parcels 7B1 through 7B12, contingent upon the presentation of a clear and undisputed chain of title. And then she saw the number. It wasn't buried in the text. It was set apart, stark and impossible, for a total sum of $9.3 million. $9.3 million. The number seemed to vibrate on the screen. It was an amount so vast, so disconnected from her reality of carefully managed savings and living paycheck to paycheck, that it felt like a misprint. She read it again, and again. $9,300,000. The parcel numbers listed in the notice were an exact match for the ones typed on the dusty manila envelopes sitting less than 10 feet away from her. It was real. The adrenaline that surged through her was nothing like the focused calm of a medical emergency. This was a chaotic, terrifying explosion of emotion. It was the dizzying vertigo of standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath your feet. It was the blinding flash of a lightning strike right outside your window. Vindication washed over her, a fierce, triumphant wave. She hadn't been a fool. Her gamble had been more right than she could have ever imagined. But hot on its heels came a cold, paralyzing terror. This wasn't a fun to fix the roof and buy Leo a new bike. This was a life-altering, world-shattering sum of money. It was a target. It was a burden. Her gaze fell on Leo, sleeping peacefully, his face soft and untroubled in the lantern light. The abstract, terrifying number on the screen suddenly coalesced into a single, powerful purpose. It was a future. It was security. It was the chance for him to have everything she had never been able to give him. It was college funds and travel, stability and opportunity. The weight on her shoulders shifted from terror to an immense, sobering responsibility. This was no longer a puzzle to be solved out of curiosity. It was a fight she had to win. She closed the laptop, the sudden darkness in the room feeling profound. Her mind, trained to assess, plan and act, settled on a single, clear and unequivocal course of action. She needed a lawyer. The decision, once made, settled in her bones with the weight of cold, hard certainty. She needed a lawyer. But as the initial shockwave of the $9.3 million discovery receded, it left behind the treacherous terrain of reality. This wasn't a matter of calling the first name in the phone book. The world she was about to step into was a minefield of corporate lawyers, arcane statutes, and the kind of crushing legal pressure that could pulverize a person's life into dust. She needed a specialist, a warrior who spoke the language of mineral rights and sovereign land transfers, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by a behemoth like Apex Industrial. Her search began not with panic, but with the same methodical precision she would use to research a new medical procedure. In the quiet hours after Leo was asleep, with the lantern casting a warm, isolated pool of light on her laptop, she delved into case law, news archives, and legal forums. She compiled a list, her criteria simple and exacting. She wasn't looking for the lawyer with the fanciest office or the most television commercials. She was looking for a fighter, someone who had a documented history of representing the individual against the institution, the homesteader against the developer, the citizen against the state. The first few candidates were quickly dismissed. One was a partner at a massive firm in the city, his website adorned with photos of him shaking hands with politicians. He felt too polished, too connected to the very world she was fighting against. Another was a small, local generalist, a kind-faced man who handled everything from divorces to DUIs. His heart might be in the right place, but this case required a scalpel, not a butter knife. She felt a familiar sense of unease, the feeling of being presented with inadequate tools for a life-or-death procedure. Then, buried in a decade-old article about a bitter water rights dispute between a family of ranchers and a mining conglomerate, she found a name: David Chin. The journalist had described him not in the fawning terms reserved for legal celebrities, but with a grudging respect, calling him a tenacious bulldog with an encyclopedic knowledge of 19th-century land patents. The article mentioned he had won the case, securing the ranchers' ancestral water rights against a team of 6 corporate attorneys. His office wasn't in a gleaming downtown tower, but in the small mountain town of North Fork, an hour's drive away. Something about it felt right. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a local weapon. The drive to North Fork took her further into the mountains, along roads that hugged the contours of the land. David Chen's office was exactly as she had pictured it, and that was a comfort. It was a modest, second-floor suite above a hardware store, the scent of sawdust and fertilizer faintly mingling with the building's own aroma of old paper and brewing coffee. The waiting room was just a couple of chairs and a table stacked with well-thumbed magazines about fly fishing and forestry. The walls were covered not with expensive art, but with framed topographical maps, their surfaces marked with handwritten notes and colored pins. David Chun emerged from his office, hand outstretched. He was in his late 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face, dark eyes that missed nothing, and a slightly rumpled appearance that suggested he valued his work more than his wardrobe. He was all focus, his energy coiled and ready. "Ms. Bishop," he said, his handshake firm. "Please, come in." His private office was a controlled chaos of knowledge. Books on property law, geology, and state history were crammed into every available shelf, spilling onto the floor in precarious stacks. Rolled-up survey maps filled a tall wicker basket in the corner. He cleared a pile of files from a chair and gestured for her to sit, then rounded his large, cluttered desk and fixed his gaze on her. He didn't start with pleasantries. He just waited, his posture conveying a simple, direct message. "Show me what you have." Lauren, in turn, met his intensity with her own quiet, methodical competence. She didn't present her story as a windfall or a desperate plea. She laid it out as a sequence of events, a chain of evidence. She spoke of the auction, the condition of the station, and the discovery of the file cabinet. Her voice was steady, the voice of a medic giving a report, sticking to the facts. She showed him the photos she had taken of the sealed envelopes, her notebook with the transcribed parcel numbers, and the images of the master survey map Arthur Vance had shown her. As a final step, she turned her laptop around and showed him the public offer from Apex Industrial. She had not brought the original deeds. It was a cautious, calculated move, a sign that she understood the value and vulnerability of what she possessed. David listened without interruption, his eyes flicking from her face to the evidence she presented. When she finished, a long silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of an old regulator clock on the wall. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Arthur Vance," he said, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "If Arthur says the map is right, the map is right. The man's a legend. He can smell a bad property line from a mile away." He leaned forward again, his expression turning serious, the initial assessment over. "You understand what you're up against, Ms. Bishop? Apex Industrial is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Their legal department is the size of a small army, and their primary tactic is attrition. They will try to bury you in motions, depositions, and delays. They will bleed you dry, emotionally and financially, until you give up." Lauren met his gaze without flinching. "I was a medic in the National Guard. I've been in places where people were actively trying to kill me. I don't bleed out easy," she said, her voice low and firm. "I understand the stakes. I also understand that I have the deeds. They have an offer. It seems to me they need what I have." A slow, genuine grin spread across David's face. The last vestiges of professional skepticism in his eyes were replaced by a spark of pure, intellectual excitement. This was it. The beautiful, complex, impossible case. The kind of fight that reminded him why he'd chosen this path in the first place. "They do," he said, his voice now charged with energy. "They need clear title to access the quarry, and you, Ms. Bishop, are sitting on the only key that can unlock it. The fact that the deeds were signed and sealed by the authorized Forestry Service officials before the regional office was dissolved is the entire crux of the matter. They are legally executed documents that were simply never recorded. It's a clerical error of historic proportions." He stood up and began to pace the small space in front of his desk, his mind already working, assembling strategies. "We file a petition to quiet title. We'll include a certified copy of Arthur's testimony regarding the master map and the historical context. We'll argue that the chain of title is clear, even if it was misplaced for 40 years. It's a long shot, but it's a clean shot." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "I'll take the case on contingency, 30%. Steep, but you won't pay a dime unless we win." and we will win. He extended his hand again. This is the kind of case that keeps me in this business, Ms. Bishop. A fight for what's right, buried under a mountain of paper. Lauren shook his hand, a wave of profound relief washing over her. She had found her weapon. She had found her ally. The first shot was fired not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a printer. David drafted a letter to Apex Industrial's general counsel. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, a carefully worded document that formally asserted Lauren Bishop's claim to the Granite Peak Quarry and its associated access rights as specified in their own public offer. It stated that his client was in possession of the original, executed mineral rights deeds for the 7B cluster and was prepared to validate her claim in a court of law. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly uncompromising. It was a declaration of war, delivered by certified mail. Lauren was back at the ranger station, high on the mountain that was now the epicenter of her life. The abstract legal battle felt a world away from the tangible, physical reality of her work. She was on the roof, the sun warm on her back, the air sharp and clean in her lungs. She was teaching Leo how to lay shingles, his small hands carefully placing the nails as she held the asphalt squares in place. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the hammer was a grounding, meditative sound. The physical labor was a balm, a way to channel the nervous energy that thrummed just beneath her surface. Every shingle she nailed down was an act of defiance, a claim on this place, on her future. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She saw David's name on the screen and answered, her heart giving a slight lurch. "The letter was delivered and signed for an hour ago," he said, his voice crisp and businesslike. "The ball is in their court now." "What do you think they'll do?" she asked, looking out over the vast expanse of wilderness. "They'll do what bullies always do," David replied. "First, they'll ignore it, hope you go away. When that doesn't work, they'll send a low-level attorney to make a nuisance offer, something insulting, maybe $50,000 or $100,000 just to see if you'll bite. When you refuse, they'll get nasty. They'll try to discredit you, discredit the deeds, discredit Arthur Vance. They will push back, and they will push back hard. Be ready for it." "I'm ready," Lauren said, and the words felt true. She ended the call and looked down at Leo, who was watching her with his serious, observant eyes. "Everything okay, Mom?" She smiled, a real smile, full of a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. "Everything is fine, buddy. We're just fixing our roof." She looked out at the view, the rolling hills and distant peaks. It was no longer just a landscape. It was a battlefield. The $9.3 million was no longer a dream, it was a war chest. And this cabin, this broken-down, beautiful ranger station, was her fortress. A surge of grim, cold determination flowed through her, displacing the last of her fear. She was a veteran. She was a survivor. She was a mother. She knew how to fight for what mattered. She picked up her hammer, the weight of it familiar and comforting in her hand. She positioned a new nail, its silver tip glinting in the sun. With a single, firm, and perfectly placed strike, she drove it home. The response from Apex Industrial came not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet, insidious creep, exactly as David had predicted. A week after the certified letter was signed for, a sleek, black sedan, utterly alien against the rustic backdrop of the mountain, navigated the rutted dirt road and pulled to a stop just shy of the cabin. Lauren was on the porch, sanding a reclaimed window frame, the fine grit of the paper whispering against the old wood. Leo was 100 feet away, near the tree line, meticulously constructing a small dam in a stream. She watched as two men in dark suits emerged from the car, their polished city shoes crunching awkwardly on the gravel. One of them was Mr. Thorne, the developer from the auction, his face set in a mask of smug superiority. "Ms. Bishop?" Thorne called out, his voice a slick, unwelcome sound in the clean mountain air. He didn't approach the porch, instead maintaining a calculated distance, as if her poverty might be contagious. "We received a rather ambitious letter from your attorney." Lauren set the window frame down slowly, wiping her dusty hands on her jeans. She remained on the porch, her elevation giving her a slight, but psychologically significant, advantage. It wasn't ambitious, Mr. Thorne. It was factual. Thorne's associate, a younger man with a hungry look, stepped forward. Apex Industrial is prepared to be generous, he said, his tone condescending. To resolve this clerical nuisance and to compensate you for your discovery, we are authorized to offer you a one-time payment of $100,000. Think of it as a finder's fee. $100,000. The number was both an insult and a test. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place, a sum that could have solved all her problems just 2 weeks ago. But now it was a pittance, a lure for the desperate. She saw the calculation in their eyes, the assumption that she was just another broke dreamer who could be bought off cheap. The public offer stands at $9.3 million, Lauren said. Her voice is steady and unyielding as the granite peaks behind her. My attorney has the paperwork to validate my claim to that offer. I'm not interested in a finder's fee for my own property. Thorne's smirk tightened into a sneer. Your property? You bought a shack, Ms. Bishop, not a quarry. Those papers you found are a historical footnote, a legal ghost. You try to take this to court, and our lawyers will tie you up in litigation until your son is in college. We will bury you. We will take this house. We will take every penny you have. We will prove you are nothing but a failed EMT trying to extort a corporation. Is that what you want for your boy? He gestured vaguely towards Leo, a subtle, chilling threat. The mention of Leo was a mistake. The protective instinct that had driven her through firefights and backcountry blizzards surged, cold and sharp. Her posture didn't change, but a new hardness settled in her eyes. The difference between you and me, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, is that I'm used to fighting for things that matter. This is my home. You and your friend are trespassing. I suggest you get back in your car and drive down this mountain before your vehicle gets a flat tire. The road is rough up here. Things happen. The younger man looked unnerved, but Thorne just laughed. A short, ugly sound. You have our offer, Ms. Bishop. It expires in 24 hours. They turned, climbed back into their pristine sedan, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering scent of corporate arrogance. Lauren's hands were trembling, not from fear, but from rage. She took a deep, steadying breath, the crisp air a balm on her frayed nerves. The fight was no longer just on paper. They had brought it to her home. She called David the moment she was back inside. She recounted the conversation word for word, her medic's memory for detail serving her well. When she got to the part about Thorne's threat against her and Leo, David's voice on the other end of the line turned to ice. They put a threat in writing, Lauren. Well, not in writing, but you're a credible witness, he said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. They're arrogant and they're sloppy. This is good for us. Don't worry. They can't touch you. They can't touch your son. They just showed their hand. They're scared. The $100,000 offer proves they know your claim has merit. It's a nuisance offer designed to test your resolve. You passed. So what's our next move? Lauren asked, pacing the rough-hewn floor of the cabin. Now we stop asking politely. David's voice was firm, resolute. I'm filing the petition to quiet title with the court first thing in the morning. We're also filing for an immediate injunction to prevent Apex or any of its agents from setting foot on your property. We're going on the offensive. Get ready, Lauren. The real battle starts now. The legal battle that followed was a war of attrition. A slow, grinding conflict fought in the sterile, carpeted halls of justice, a world away from the tangible reality of the mountain. Apex's lawyers, a team of sharp-suited men and women from a prestigious Denver firm, descended like a flock of crows, armed with motions, counter-motions, and endless requests for discovery. They were exactly as David had described them, relentless and utterly without scruple. They deposed Lauren in a soulless conference room, the air thick with tension. For 8 straight hours they questioned her, their inquiries ranging from her military service to her financial history, from her EMT training to her relationship with Leo. They tried to twist her words, to paint her as an unstable, opportunistic grifter. They implied she had forged the deeds, that she had conspired with Arthur Vance, that she was mentally unfit. Through it all, Lauren remained a fortress of calm. She drew on the same detached focus that had allowed her to intubate a patient in the back of a bouncing ambulance. She answered their questions with a simple, unadorned honesty, her voice never wavering. She was a medic. She dealt in facts. The truth was her shield, and their insinuations slid off it like water. Ms. Bishop, the lead attorney, a man named Graves with cold, reptilian eyes, said late in the day, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You've lived a hard life, a decorated veteran, a single mother. Isn't it possible that you so desperately wanted these papers to be real, to be your ticket out, that you've convinced yourself of a fantasy? Lauren met his gaze, her own eyes clear and direct. I've seen the difference between fantasy and reality, Mr. Graves. I've held it in my hands. Fantasy is wishing a patient will survive. Reality is doing the work to make it happen. These deeds are real. Your offer is real. The only fantasy here is your belief that I will give up. They deposed Arthur Vance next, hoping to discredit the old surveyor. They brought in their own experts who testified that the 40-year-old master map was unreliable, that Arthur's memory was faulty, that the entire claim was based on archaic, unenforceable documents. But Arthur, with his encyclopedic knowledge and unwavering integrity, was immovable. He walked them through the history of the Forestry Service, the budget cuts of the early 1980s, and the specific protocols for land relinquishment. He was a living library of county history, and by the end of his deposition, Apex's own experts were taking notes. The turning point came from a place no one expected. While preparing for trial, David, in his meticulous, bulldog fashion, had filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all internal communications from the old Regional Forestry Office related to the Granite Peak land sale. The government sent back boxes of documents, a mountain of bureaucratic paper that David spent weeks sifting through. And in one of those boxes, misfiled in a folder labeled Office Supplies, he found it. It was a single-page internal memo, dated October 17, 1982. It was from the regional director to the head of the Land Management Division. The memo confirmed that the deeds for the 7B cluster, including the mineral rights for the Granite Peak quarry, had been fully executed and were awaiting recordation by the county. The final sentence was the kill shot. It read, pending final transfer, all associated parcels are to be considered private holdings, no longer subject to federal oversight. It was the missing link. It was the official, documented moment the land had ceased to be public and had become private, its fate tied to the deeds that now sat in a safe in David Chen's office. The failure to record them was a clerical error, but the memo proved the intent was clear and the action was complete. David called Lauren, his voice electric with the thrill of discovery. We got them, Lauren. We got them cold. He immediately filed the memo with the court. The reaction from Apex's legal team was swift and panicked. They filed a motion to have the memo declared inadmissible. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had grown tired of Apex's bullying tactics, denied their motion in a scathing two-sentence ruling. The trial was 2 weeks away, and their case had just been gutted. The call came on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't from Graves or one of his junior associates. It was from the general counsel of Apex Industrial himself. He wanted to schedule a settlement conference. The negotiation took place on neutral ground, in a conference room at a hotel halfway between North Fork and the city. Lauren sat beside David, her hands resting calmly on the polished mahogany table. Across from them sat the Apex General Counsel and a chastened-looking Mr. Graves. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, pragmatic professionalism. They started by re-offering the $9.3 million. David just smiled. That was the offer before your clients engaged in a campaign of witness intimidation and filed a dozen frivolous motions, he said calmly. That was before my client had to endure an 8-hour deposition where you questioned her sanity and her integrity. That was before my firm spent hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars fighting a battle you knew you were going to lose. The price has gone up. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Contained a new number, $10.5 million, 9.3 for the quarry, and $1.2 million in damages and legal fees. The general counsel looked at the number, then at David, then at Lauren. He was looking for a sign of weakness, a flicker of doubt. He found none. Lauren's expression was serene, her gaze steady. She was no longer the desperate woman from the auction. She was the owner of Granite Peak Quarry. "This is outrageous," Graves blustered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "No," David said, his voice soft but firm. "Outrageous was sending Mr. Thorne to my client's home to threaten her and her son. This is just business. You have until 5 p.m. to accept. Otherwise, we'll see you in court, and I will make sure that little memo about the land being private gets read into the public record. I imagine your shareholders will be very interested to learn how much money you spent trying to bully a single mother out of a $10 million asset." The silence in the room was absolute. The general counsel stared at the paper for a long minute, his jaw tight. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. "We accept." The money, when it arrived, was an abstraction, a string of zeros in a bank account. The reality was in the small things. It was in the new, top-of-the-line generator that hummed quietly behind the cabin, ensuring they would never lose power. It was in the brand-new, fully stocked trauma kit, a professional-grade setup that sat by the front door, a testament to who she was and what she did. It was in the quiet satisfaction of paying for the final shipment of lumber to finish the cabin's restoration. Not with a credit card, but with a simple bank transfer. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after the settlement, Lauren stood in the main room of the ranger station. The scent of fresh-cut pine and varnish had replaced the old smell of dust and decay. The walls were warm and insulated, the windows new and clear, framing the magnificent, unchanging view. Leo was at the new kitchen table, his schoolbook spread out, a scholarship fund already in place to take him wherever his brilliant mind wanted to go. Lauren walked over to a space on the wall where a faded, water-stained photograph of a long-forgotten ranger had once hung. She had taken it down weeks ago. In her hands, she held a large, framed map. It was a modern, high-resolution topographical map of the surrounding national forest and her property, the 7B cluster clearly outlined. She hung it on the wall, the lines and contours a familiar, comforting sight. It was the same ridge line, the same ancient sweep of mountain and valley that had been there for centuries. A different century, a different purpose. She was no longer just a visitor here, a gambler who had taken a desperate chance. She was a guardian, a steward. She had fought for this place, and in doing so, she had found not just a home, but a deeper, more profound sense of her own strength. The mountain had given her its secret, and she, in turn, would give it her care. She was home.